Oh shit. Here we go again.
Oh boy. The community is split because a warframe just got reworked. Half of the people are saying it's terrible, the other half are saying that this is an amazing rework, and if you want to know where I stand on the opinion that this in fact is probably one of the best reworks Valkyrie could have gotten in the current state of the game. A lot of players are complaining that her invincibility got removed, which I don't really understand because having a 5-second invulnerability window and hitting 4 enemies a couple times to get that invulnerability back is not difficult. On top of that, when you're invulnerable, you regenerate all of your health, so again, I don't know what people are really complaining about. If that 5-second invulnerability window is not enough for you, you can just use rolling guard to add an additional 3 seconds of invulnerability, making the total invulnerability of Valkyr 8 seconds. Now, I understand that being completely invulnerable is much more powerful when it comes to level cap missions, but this makes warframes quite boring to play. And before the rework, honestly, a lot of her abilities and her passive were complete garbage. Her first ability was awful, as was her third ability, and they never really served her any purpose. But now, her entire kit works amazingly together. She feels much more enjoyable to play, her attacks feel way more fluid, and her movement feels way more aggressive, which is important because you actually feel like you're playing a Berserker class warframe compared to how it did before. Let's talk about the rework that she received, because it's important that you understand the extent of how good the rework actually is for Valkyr as a whole. I've noticed a lot of players just jump on the hating bandwagon, which I really don't understand because there are players who have already shown that health tanking works in level cap, so I think this just boils down to a skill issue. But anyway, I just want to show you guys how much more enjoyable her kit has become after this rework. Firstly, her passive before reduced stagger and knockdown durations by 50%. Now this passive was entirely useless because when you're invulnerable, you don't get knocked down and you don't get staggered. The new passive, however, is Valkyr's Rage Meter. The way the Rage Meter works is if you attack an enemy or kill them, you will get a set percentage of rage. Now I've tested this and I don't know how much rage Hysteria gives on an individual hit, but hitting a small group of enemies can give you anywhere from 30 to 80% rage with just one melee attack, which is insane because to have the invulnerability activate, you have to have at least 150% rage on her passive. When your health does get low and you do become invulnerable, you can melee attack with Hysteria to get all of your health back, and you can keep cycling this as much as you want because there is no cooldown for her invincibility, which makes her pretty much unkillable. But another thing that a lot of people just for some reason are ignoring is the massive melee damage that Rage now gives you. Before, her exalted weapon was nowhere near as powerful as some of the other exalted weapons like Gara's sword or Excalibur's sword or Korra's whipclaw. Now, with the help of this 300% melee damage boost, you can do hundreds of millions of damage with just one heavy attack, especially when you pair it with subsume abilities like Wrathful Advance, Raw or Nourish. Let me quickly tell you guys what has changed for Valkyr and what the rework has done to her abilities. Ripline, which is her first ability before, was very clunky. Even though it was meant to be a movement ability, it never felt like one. You just flew into walls when using it and the ripline was very slow. Also, when you hit an enemy, it would pull them away and not pull you closer to them, which didn't really make sense. But now this ability is much better than it used to be. The speed of ripline has been increased and the ease of use for the ability has also been increased. You will notice that the ability now is much more fluid to use compared to how it was before. Jumping before using the ripline also gives you a small momentum boost, so if you want to launch yourself across the map, just jump before you cast your ripline ability. The biggest change is when you cast it on a target, it will pull all the other enemies in a 9-meter radius around that target into a small group and knock them down. And when she approaches the target, she will do a automatic melee attack, which is amazing because you can combo that melee attack straight into her Hysteria stance combo. Our ripline before was almost useless, but now it's become an amazing ability to close the gap between you and enemies, especially on larger tile sets. Ripline also has an augment that makes Ripline cost no energy when you're airborne, and it increases your parkour velocity by 20%. This just makes the ability S tier in my opinion, because now you can gap close with using no energy, as well as group enemies. Even if it's not a large radius, the grouping is still somewhat valuable. Her second ability is Warcry. Warcry in essence is the exact same ability as it was before. The only main difference is that the duration of the ability went from 15 to 20 seconds to help you upkeep it for much longer. And they've changed the way that this ability affects your teammates. So now instead of it affecting them based on meter range, which relies heavily on the amount of ability range you have, it is now affected by the affinity radius, which is, I believe, 50 meters, and this cannot be changed, reduced, or otherwise. Warcry also no longer slows any enemies, which used to be useless anyway, because you'd only slow enemies in front of you, you wouldn't be slowing enemies constantly, so it was kind of useless. But you can also move while casting the ability now, and it's recastable, which takes away a lot of the clunkiness that Valkyr had before this update. Paralysis has been changed completely because the ability was completely useless on previous Valkyr. It has now been changed to give a melee damage vulnerability to targets as well as slow enemies down. It also doesn't cost shield anymore, it just costs a base 25 energy. Prolonged paralysis is the augment for this ability, and this is the augment now that you need that pulls enemies towards you when you use paralysis. Now paralysis used to be quite buggy before, but now they've fixed the bug entirely, and whenever you group up enemies it's almost seamless and there is no issue at all. Remember, Xmas units can't be pulled. Hysteria's invulnerability has been completely removed and replaced with the passive that I mentioned earlier, but it also now gives you 3 times the armor that you have at base. All status effects are immune to you whenever you are in Hysteria, and the energy drain cap has been reduced to 5 and it was previously 15. The lifesteal for this ability has also changed. Before it used to be percentage based, now it is just a set amount that you heal, and the set amount that you heal per hit now is 100 health, which is honestly great because this health can be scaled with power strength. Another very important thing was Valkyr used to rely heavily on slide attacks because her slide attacks always did the most damage, but now her regular attacks do a lot of damage as well because their damage multipliers have been increased up to 300%, which is quite a lot. The amount of combo she gains per attack has also changed depending on what attack pattern you are using. The 2 augments for this mod remain still quite bad. Hysterical Assault I would say is pretty decent if you replace Ripline with your subsume ability, because Hysterical Assault basically lets you gap close in an instant as well as give you parkour and sprint speed increase for 5 seconds. Now before I show you guys the build, let me tell you some things that I've realized while testing her new kit out. Since she has amazing movement and her combos feel much more fluid now, you don't really need melee influence. Melee influence is used to hit multiple enemies around you with status effects to have damage cover a much wider area, but since Valkyr has a very low status chance and amazing movement, this isn't really the best option that you could opt for. Melee Afflictions is in the same boat since none of her attacks ragdoll any enemies and slam attacks just got nerfed. Melee Afflictions also isn't a good option, but we do have one arcane that makes her do hundreds of millions of damage to enemies, and that is Arcane Exposure. For every ability you cast, you gain a 60% corrosive buff, which caps out at 240%. The 240% buff is amazing paired with all our other mods, as well as the 300% melee damage multiplier that we get from her new passive. Since gap closing can be done with either Ripline or the augment for her 4th ability, which can be put into the Exodus mod slot, you don't need to spread damage too much because you can just fly across the map and kill anybody that you want in any instant. So for the build, it's important to know that you need as much power strength as you possibly can have. So for our Aura mod slot, we use Growing Power, and for our Exodus mod slot, we use Swingline. Swingline gives us 20% parkour velocity, but it also makes it so Ripline, our first ability, has no energy cost when you're airborne, which is amazing since we're using melee exposure on our claws for Valkyr. Having this Exodus mod allows you to max stack your exposure to get the 240% corrosive buff with no issues whatsoever, and you can keep it topped at all times. For duration mods, we use Augur Message as well as Primed Continuity. We use Equilibrium with Nourish, which is more than enough energy economy. You don't need any more than this. You don't need Arcane Energize. Trust me, you won't. For our strength mods, we use Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude to give us 254% power strength for Valkyr as well as Nourish. And then we use Precision Intensify to give us an additional 90% ability strength on Valkyr's claws. The reason having a lot of ability strength is important because it increases the base damage of your claws. For our last 2 mod slots, we use Eternal War, which you can remove if you want to. The only reason I use Eternal War is to keep Warcry active at all times. You can take it off if you want because the ability is now recastable, and since we'll have so much energy at all times, you can just keep spam casting it. But I like it on because it's just a convenience for me. For our last mod slot, we use Quick Thinking. Now again, this is a mod that you can take and replace with anything you want. The reason I use Quick Thinking is because I have Arcane Battery. With Arcane Battery, my total energy tops up to around 1300, and if I don't have my passives invulnerability active, then I can rely on my energy pool as well as my health pool to tank the damage that I need to take. And trust me, with this mod alone, you are basically unkillable. For Valkyr's Arcanes, I'll use Molt Augmented and Arcane Battery. If you want to use other Arcanes, you can. You don't have to be locked on these. Molt Augmented gives me an additional 60%, and pairing that with all the other strength buffs that I have on my warframe, I end up having around a 400% strength buff, which is very strong when it comes to increasing the base damage of Hysteria. And Arcane Battery paired with Quick Thinking as well as Equilibrium just help me stay alive in moments where I don't have my invulnerability active, which usually is never the case, but it's just a nice safety net to have, because you'll notice you'll always have around 1300 health on Valkyr, and you'll always almost be unkillable. But just in the odd chance that you're not, it's a safety net there that is pretty decent. For Archon Shards, if you're a newer player, don't worry, you don't need to use them yet. Valkyr already does enough damage to cover basically all content in the game, maybe except level cap without shards. But if you don't have shards, don't stress, you don't need them. If you do have shards, I would highly recommend you use purple shards for crit damage. You should use at least 3 Tau Forged or 4 regular if you don't have any Tau Forged. And the reason is because her claws inherently are crit weapons. They have a very high 50% crit chance base, so having as much crit damage as we can will increase her red crit damage by a substantial amount. 1 casting speed shard is also recommended, but it's not required because it just makes your gameplay a bit more fluid. 1 duration shard is used for comfort and lowering the energy cost per second for Hysteria. This is the claw build. I won't go too much into this because it's just your regular base damage, crit chance, crit damage, range, and a corrosive build. Now the reason I use Magnetic Rush is because my only pet peeve with this game right now is the amount of Eximus units there are. Eximus units just are flooded everywhere in endgame, and having just 1 proc of Magnetic on these enemies deletes their overguard. So for that reason, Magnetic is something I personally like to use in pretty much all of my melee builds now. It also deals with Corpus very well, which is like another good reason to use Magnetic Rush. Our arcane is melee exposure, as I explained before. It's a good arcane to have to increase our overall base damage. And for our Exilis mod slot, I use Opportunity's Reach, which enables Tenokai. Tenokai, in my opinion, is amazing, and not having it on Valkyr is a bit boring. It just makes her claws just mainly slide attacks and regular attacks. Adding the odd heavy attack here and there just makes her feel a bit more enjoyable to play. But this is the build for the claws. Now moving on to my yap session. A lot of players don't seem to understand that it's not the fault of the rework, but actually just the fault of outdated game mechanics. Now I was going to make a video and publish it before the Valkyr rework was even coming out, because I already knew that a lot of players would already hate the rework, and for good reason. Valkyr is a warframe that is played in mostly higher level or level cap missions. Therefore, a lot of players that used to play her because she used to go completely invincible. But you can't become completely invincible anymore, and in level cap missions, that can sometimes be an absolute pain in the butt. But invulnerability isn't what warframes should rely on when it comes to staying alive in missions. If you look at the current enemy damage scaling, you will see that there is a big problem in the game, and enemy damage scaling hasn't been really updated for Warframe as it stands in 2025. The armor update that happened recently was amazing because it gave a lot of Warframes that didn't have any armor strip abilities to be played in high level content, giving us a much more versatile kit on what we can bring and not bring in high level missions. But that same sort of logic and thought needs to be put into enemy damage scaling as well as enemy level scaling. Because if you do an hour survival run Why is it that the enemy level only goes from 140 to 200? That's an hour of gameplay, which quite frankly is ridiculous, because an hour of gameplay should include much more rewards as well as an increase in difficulty that's substantial. But in missions like survival, you don't really have that at all, which is why I would say that the main problem of Warframe today is the way that the enemies scale rather than the fall of reworks and Warframes. If they reduce or cap the way enemy damage scales, that would be a great thing for the game's overall health, because a lot more players will be able to do level cap content efficiently. And speaking about level cap content, the enemy level should scale much faster than it does currently in missions like survival. But I understand that not a lot of players want the game to be difficult, therefore the enemy scaling can be less harsh than Void Cascade, but in an hour of survival, the enemy level should increase much more than 30 levels or 50 levels. The enemy level should go from 150 to at least 900 in an hour. I believe this is the main problem with Warframe, not the fact that the invincibility was taken off Valkyr, because to be quite frank, relying on invulnerability as a survivability mechanic, in all honesty, is very lazy and it shows you bad game design. Now, I love Warframe, so I'm not going to speak badly about the game. However, there are some things that really need to be looked into by the devs, because the way the game is going right now, I feel like there will be a potential decline in game quality as the years go on. Another thing I just don't understand and can't wrap my head around is, if you're going to make Valkyr a health-based Warframe, why doesn't she have an ability that gives her damage reduction? The way damage reduction works in this game is the more layers of damage reduction you have, the less damage you are likely to take. The whole issue with Valkyr is that she doesn't even have a damage reduction ability. She has abilities that increase armor, but at the end of the day, this is only one layer of damage reduction. I made a Seren health tanking build as the first video on my YouTube channel, and that is a great example of what a health tanking frame should be. If Seren had an independent layer of damage reduction from an ability other than armor, then she would be even tankier, but because she had a high health and a high armor pool, she was a suitable candidate to be made into a pretty decent health tanking Warframe. But why would you release a health tanking Warframe without armor or some sort of damage reduction ability, which is what recently just happened with Araxia. Araxia is a health-based frame that has a passive that gives you invisibility, but the invisibility that Araxia gets does not help her in any way with her health tanking. Now, why am I saying Araxia is a health tanking Warframe? Because when she casts her ultimate, her health increases by 3, sometimes even 4 times, depending on how much power strength you have, but she doesn't have a high armor pool, and she also doesn't have any damage reduction abilities. What is DE doing? If you're going to release a invisibility frame, then give them shield gate so they can comfortably play. You don't give a Warframe invisibility and then make them into a balloon, so if an enemy was to hit you while you're invisible, you would instantly just die. Health requires some sort of damage reduction. Shields have an innate 50% damage reduction from all sources except Toxin, since Toxin bypasses shields in every instance. But with health, health has no innate damage reduction, it's just health. I'll make a video on Araxia sometime soon, but I just wanted to say this because if a dev does end up watching this, you guys need to put more thought into your Warframes, man, because this is not good. If you guys have any ideas, then please pop them down in the chat. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys are staying safe. Please take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.